What up, people? How you doing? This is D House. This is my coverage of the election. And now remember, the footage I'm going to show you is not, I don't own the rights to this. These are not my words. This is what's being said on television. So, but this is my coverage of the election.
Less than 100,000 votes. Republicans were successful in trying to tie Democrats and Joe Biden, even though he made it very clear publicly he's not a socialist. They were very successful, it appears, in maybe possibly doing that, tied into that. It was the same thing that happened to Andrew Gillum 2 years ago. Everyone thought he was going to win this state. He was a popular mayor from Tallahassee, and he lost to Ron DeSantis. Speaking of Governor DeSantis, let's go to his county, Volusia County. This is a Trump barometer. President Trump is where he needs to be.
Interesting numbers.
That's exactly where he was 4 years ago. Another Trump barometer state, Fort Myers, Lee County. You look where he was 4 years ago, 58. He's at 59. So just do the math, George. He's winning where he won before, and it's better than Miami-Dade County. It looks like it could be as nice. It's still early. We still got 9% of the votes to go here. But again, like I said, it's going to be hard for Democrats to make up the vote.
Robert, what do you make of that underperformance in Miami-Dade? Well, I think probably the president's done what Tom just said, a really good job with the Cuban community, the Venezuelan community, Latin America as a whole, Central America, and there's an underperformance there in the African-American area.
It's going to be a very interesting election to see what happens. See who's going to win this.
North Carolina.
Let's bring North Carolina back up.
Is the Democratic counties, you're getting 84% reporting, yet only 62% reporting in the state. So this thing's going to tighten in a way. But I do think you see a trend, well, across the country as you kind of extrapolate the data, that Biden is doing much better among both independent voters, white voters as a whole, and clearly suburban and senior voters, but not doing as well in the African-American voters.
I was going to ask about that right now. You seem to have resistance, particularly among young African-American black men, all through this campaign.
You know, I think to start out, there wasn't a real strategy, right? That was the challenge. He couldn't quite confront, and we talked about this a lot on the program, he couldn't confront his past.
They're trying to project who's voting for who.
Donald Trump was taking credit for criminal justice reform in certain places, particularly in Florida, as you remember, the reenfranchisement of former incarcerated people, and he just couldn't gain ground there, and I didn't see the strategy. There were a lot of organizations in certain states that were specifically targeting black men, but Florida was unfortunately not one of them. We should see those numbers be quite significant in places like Georgia, where there was a specific effort for black men in that state. So hopefully they will show up, but I think that was the challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting when you start hearing all this kind of stuff.
Failure to confront his past on criminal justice reform. You know, there was also some conversation about Kamala Harris's past there as well, and there was not a clear black male agenda, unfortunately, that was consistent throughout the campaign. That may end up costing him.
George, three states, George, that I would tell you.
I said we got to do to get some new leadership in there.
In Florida, from Republican leaders, I'm hearing there's just no place for Joe Biden to make up 220,000 votes, and then eventually we'll wind up calling Florida for Trump. Second, in North Carolina, the Trump campaign is very encouraged by the early vote numbers that they've seen, and they think, based on what happened today at the polls, and it's still happening, that they're going to be able to make it up and win narrowly in North Carolina. Lastly, in Pennsylvania, and we're seeing this all over, in Philadelphia, there has been a real underperformance by African-American voters in returning their mail-in ballots. They've been seeing this for about 10 days. They were hoping it would come and close tonight.
Yeah, Trump winning in Florida.
So we're seeing that. We're also hearing about double-digit underperformance of African-American voters in the city of Cleveland. If those trends continue, all of those trends are very helpful to Donald Trump.
Byron Pitts, what do you make of that?
Interesting.
You talk to black Democrats in North Carolina, it's a head-scratcher. It's disappointing. Consider this, George, that North Carolina has the 7th largest black population in the country. In fact, there are more HBCU, historically black college university students in the state of North Carolina. So this is a state with an established black middle class in every major city in the state, but yet Biden isn't doing as well, or there hasn't been as much black support for him or enthusiasm. Consider this, in 2008, when Barack Obama won this state, one of only 2 Democrats to win here since 1976, 75% of the black vote came out for Barack Obama. For Hillary Clinton, it dropped down to 64%. And so it's always been curious concerning what would black turnout be for Joe Biden tonight. And George, it says a lot about the psychology of people. Certainly the turnout for Barack Obama was huge in huge for Barack Obama in 2008 because that spoke to pride and optimism. Make no mistake, The vast majority of black voters in North Carolina are not fans of President Trump. So in 2008, we saw the power of hope and pride. And now we're seeing if anger and frustration would be enough to energize black voters. And so far, it seems the answer is no.
I want to bring Terry Moran in on this as well. We saw a series of messages from the president on this whole issue. He talks about law and order. He also talks about to African Americans directly on issues of criminal justice. Says that he's the best president for Black Americans since Abraham Lincoln. At the same time, that Joe Biden is going back to Charlottesville, calling the president a white supremacist.
Well, I think a couple of things are happening. One is that President Trump is clearly diversifying the Republican Party. It's hard to argue with that tonight, given the results in Miami-Dade County and what we're seeing if it pans out among black men. It could be that there's a gender divide in the black community that we haven't seen before, with black men more comfortable with President Trump's persona and maybe with his message of, get rich under me, and that is obviously something that every person would want, but maybe it's more appealing. I think there's something else at work as well. Look, the Republican Party 8 years ago, after they lost to Barack Obama, had a big heart-to-heart talk with itself and said, we have to go and find voters in diverse communities. Donald Trump seems to have done that, and at least so far, that is one of the headlines of tonight.
We will be keeping an eye on it. Sarah Fagan.
Donald Trump competed for this vote in a way that no Republican has ever done so. When you look back at the Republican convention, every night in prime time, there were African-American voices on criminal justice reform, on the economy. And we shouldn't forget that. He deserves credit for that. And it appears that he is maybe not getting a lot of black votes, but maybe people haven't turned out tonight. And that, in some ways, had an impact.
Now, Bruce, what are you hearing from the Biden campaign about this phenomenon right now? Do they believe it?
It's a good question. Tonight they are being tight-lipped on that, of course, but it is interesting when you look at the trajectory of this campaign. Joe Biden is often accused of taking the black vote for granted. A lot of attention was paid, especially several months ago at the beginning of this pandemic. Biden on Charlemagne the God, his radio show, saying to black voters that if they don't vote for him, quote, you ain't black. That, of course, did not sit well with many in the black community, despite the fact that, of course, it was black voters, especially female black voters, that helped in many ways rescue Joe Biden's candidacy, helped deliver him this nomination, especially in the South. And Joe Biden has continued to face this criticism. I think, of course, the moment in our town hall in Pennsylvania just a couple weeks ago, a young black voter, Cedric Humphrey, stood up and asked Joe Biden, what else besides saying, you ain't black if you don't vote for me, are you going to do for the black community? Joe Biden gave him a very lengthy answer about his economic policies and how he plans to try and bridge some of the gaps that we see in this country. But I talked with Cedric after that, and he said that while, yes, he would be voting for Joe Biden, that it was going to be begrudgingly, because he simply felt that Joe Biden was just the lesser of two evils. Not exactly the kind of enthusiasm that may necessarily drive a lot of black voters, especially young black voters, to the polls. And George, I can tell you, I also spent a fair amount of time this summer out in the protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. It was again a sentiment you heard a lot from young black voters saying that Joe Biden, they felt, just didn't get them.
Mary Bruce, thanks. Cecilia Vega.
Well, it has been a real juxtaposition from this White House over the last 4 years, George, when it comes to race relations, and speaking to communities of color. This has been a president who has been among the more inflammatory presidents when it comes to race and speaking to the African American and Latino communities than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. He retweeted a video that showed a racist baby. There was that supporter who yelled an epithet at a rally at an event down in Florida. The list goes on and on. We mentioned Charlottesville. So I think we have to wait to see before we can declare whether President Trump has expanded ethnic communities in the Republican Party. I think time will tell on that. And you have said he has, when I mentioned the juxtaposition, you've got the things that the president has done, and then you've got the things that the president has said, which is that he has done more for African Americans in this country than any president since Abraham Lincoln. I think we will find out later tonight, tomorrow, down the road, whether communities of color in this country actually believe that and feel like this is a White House that has embraced embraced them with open arms over the last 4 years.
Lots more vote to be seen. It's coming up on 8:47 here in the East Coast. Right now, Donald Trump has won 5 states, 42 electoral votes. Joe Biden 6 states and 44 electoral votes. We'll be right back.
This is what the news is saying about the election. I don't own the rights to it, but this is what the news is saying, and people are saying about who they voting for. A lot of people feel like they voting for Biden because they don't have anybody else to vote for. A lot of people are not voting for Trump, but everybody has their opinion. Everybody has their right to vote whoever they want to. A lot of people have a right to not vote. Yeah, there is a high turnout rate because I think people want change. I think people want to get rid of, put someone new in office. And so far, seems like it's a neck and neck race. We'll see how it goes towards the end of the night. Only God knows who's going to win. But it's very interesting to see this whole political process. And I voted for Biden. I'm a Democrat. So but we'll see. If Trump wins, congratulations. I just know things are difficult right now, and we got to be very careful on what we do from here on out. So, with that said and being done, I hope y'all subscribe to my channel. And remember, I don't own the rights to this, so I just wanted to bring that through and show you what the news is saying.